The Ku Klux Klan, you see, in 1926, the head of the Ku Klux Klan published an article in a leading magazine that told us what the purpose was for the Klan. And the Klan of recent periods, that is in the 20th century now, is not the same Klan that was there during the end of the Civil War. So part of this I'm quoting from him. Hiram H. Evans. And his article is titled, "The Klan's Fight for Americanism." Now, the term is Americanism, and we're going to find that throughout the rest of what we're going here. The Klan, therefore, has now come to speak for the great mass of Americans of the old pioneer stock. We believe that it does fairly and faithfully represent them. Our proof lies in their support. To understand the Klan, then it is necessary to understand the character and present mind of the mass of old stock Americans. The mass, it may be remembered, as distinguished from the intellectuals Mongolizing liberals. These were the old people going back to something with them. Finally, it came to a moral, continuing through his article, finally it came to a moral breakdown that has gone on for 2 decades. One by one, all of our traditional moral standards went by the boards, or were disregarded, that they ceased to be binding. The sacredness of our Sabbath, of our homes, of charity, and finally of our right to teach our children, teach our own children in our schools, fundamental facts of truth were torn away from us. Those who maintained the old standard did so only in face of a constant ridicule and often spit upon. The world was changing, you see, in the 20th century for them. Automobiles were coming in, new ideas, Europeans were coming in, all the things that were going on, and they were losing contact with it. Well, that was not new in America. That started in the 1830s. But anyhow, going back in 1902, skipping back now and starting into our blood and guts types of thing. The mine owners on March 27, 1902, met in the Brown Palace and consolidated their program. We, members of the Colorado Mine Owners Association, individually and collectively hereby pledge ourselves to lend our earnest endeavors and our resources to stamping out the existing evils and assertions of law. The Western Federation of Miners, coal miners, all of those people that did not fit within what they thought was the way we should have within the country. That is a declaration of war. Now, they were opposed to labor unions. They're not opposed to the Mine Owners Association. You see, their own organization, but we're going to see now that coming on with some blood that comes out. Now, nationally, the National Federation of Manufacturers, they elected a new president, D.M. Perry, and in his inaugural address, part of what he said was freedom, justice, and progress. He insisted in maintaining the old system of unfettered economic freedom. Perry, also charged that the unions recruited members by intimidation, that union members were men of muscle rather than men of intelligence, more puppets than depended upon the brains of others for guidance. You've got some room here for some real problems. You had this not race, but a class structure, a different type of thing sitting on within it. The wars we're going to talk about, it takes place now. It takes place over whether we are being Americans and Americanizing, and the important part, that many things were not involved, were not recognized. Now, in the state of Colorado, we had the Citizens Alliance, and the power of the Citizens Alliance is hard to recognize. They controlled business throughout the state, and especially within Denver and that area, because their membership, you see, you controlled the First National Bank of Denver. You controlled the banks of most of Colorado, because that was the bank for the other banks. That's before the Federal Reserve. So that power sits there. These power men could control the mining associations and all other business. This is what the Citizens Alliance, and they controlled advertising. They went into that Denver Post and any of the other businesses, and if you weren't members of it, all right. Their leader, Mr. Craig, James C. Craig, in 1904 wrote in a regular publication, the socialists and anarchists of the United States have selected Colorado as the best field in which to exploit their peculiar ideas politically, and funds have gathered from all over the United States, promote the passage of the 8-hour bill, employment liability bills, initiative and referendum, see that's socialism, initiative and referendum, and other labor measures, and to capture the political machinery of the state. It's an 8-hour bill to be, look at this one here. All right, on November the 2nd, by a vote of 72,980 to 26,266, the people approved a constitutional amendment for an 8-hour day. So people who wanted to work on an 8-hour day, let me take this down now, I'm through with that. So people who wanted to work on an 8-hour day, they constitutionally should have had that right. However, the Colorado State Legislature and the governor, Peabody, said there is nothing in that bill that says that we have to pass or approve it, and that we are the government, and they did not. So the 8-hour, with a 2/3, almost a 3-to-1 majority, that is set aside. And there was a deliberate cause now to bring about bloodshed that will continue through, and Routt County will become part of it later on. So in Idaho Springs, the miners there wanted the 8 hours a day. They said, we have just passed a constitutional amendment for it. We just have the right for it. Well, the Citizens Alliance said, no, we're not going to, and they caused, so you can cause a strike by making sure that you get your people into the union, who then caused 30 problems with it. Well, they caused a strike there. It became violent, deliberately and otherwise, because Western Federation of Miners were not gentlemen to start with. This was an active a group that was ready to fight. And they had fought successfully in the West before that. Well, somebody, they accused, but somebody rolled some black powder down against the powerhouse at the Sun and Moon Mine at Idaho Springs and blew it up, as one of the guards, because there's guards clear around the place at the time, shot a man. So they said, an Italian. Well, Italians were at that time, you see, the minority thing, and from Europe and a lesser breed, and they were watched very closely. So they probably was not an Italian there. He was probably a person who had been murdered and placed there. Other investigations later on said it was virtually impossible to roll a can of black powder down that hill and hit the power plant. See, everything else was in the way. But be that as it may, the law in Clear Creek County, that is the judges and the sheriffs, was on the side of the miners. So the Citizens Alliance ousted them. Law and order was just set aside. Miners were just gathered up out of their homes and marched out. They left everything they had behind and they're gone. Then the Citizens Alliance picked on, I don't know if you've been out of Globeville, which is out just about 52nd and Pecos in Denver, just out to that part of Denver. For a long time, you know, there was a big stack that's set out there because the smelters were out there. So the men that worked in the smelters, now they are primarily immigrants from Southern Europe. They're working long hours, up to 12 hours a day, having to have the heat and the conditions that existed in trying to get a smelter, besides having all of the sulfur, because you see, most of the problems in Colorado hard rock mining dealt with sulfates. We had a tremendous amount of sulfur in there. So these guys are breathing it. They got the heat. They want 8 hours a day. And there was what constitutional amendment said they had a right to it. Well, it caused another strike, brought the militia in, and ousted them. Now, bringing in the militia, as far as the Mine Owners Association, as far as the miners are concerned, that's damn good business. Because you see, the state didn't have the money, so they borrowed the money from the First National Bank of Denver, had to pay 4 to 8% interest, so they got paid good money by keeping them in there. So the strike was a money-making deal underneath the table, you understand. Well, now they will move on down, that is the Citizens Alliance, takes on, excuse me, the smelter in Colorado City, which is just outside of Colorado Springs. Now, the Western Federation of Miners had won a major strike in 1893 at Cripple Creek. But this one now, they're going to pick them on and get it started again. Well, because it's associated with, and the mineral is coming out of Cripple Creek area, Cripple Creek goes on strike. And this is a bloody, bloody war. I won't go through all of it, but you got to read part of what goes on here, because these guys, they got it on, and they even set a booby trap at the depot at Independence as the shift was changing, and blew up the depot, and the people were in it. Harry Orchard, who was a notorious one. And back in the history of the 19th century, there was, they taught some of the radicals how to use the dynamite. And Harry Orchard was a master at it, there and in Idaho and in LA. You know, we have some, but the gunmen were also within it. The sheriff and the judge, you see, that wanted the court. He's the judge is going to hand down a decision. The case, who is the general in charge of the militia, he comes in, says, "I'm in charge," and ousts the jury, ousts the judge, and hands down his own decisions. And it is taken over, and it was ruthless. Well, finally, they will take the miners, the Western Federation of Miners, they will just simply stick them in stock cars, cattle cars, and take them out into Kansas in the middle of no place and dump them off. And this was the war. Now, within that time, The coal miners, because that's what we're going to be involved with here, the coal mines also went on strike. Down in the southern coal field, now, Routt County hasn't got their coal going yet, but it is over at Castle Rock. And John Larson, who became well-known, involved in labor, is organizing at Castle Rock. Well, Cordell, he has a mine there, and James Cordell, and so he blows up Larson's house while Larson's wife and daughter are in it. Now they were able to escape, but he blows it up. A few days later, 5 more houses were blown up. Nothing is done to Cordell. Did nothing. You know, he could blow him up. Now Larson left, and then he to Nevada for a while. He comes back, and he's getting a haircut in a barber's chair. And Cordell comes in and shoots him. Now he didn't kill him, but he shoots him. Again, nothing happens because he's a member of the Citizens Alliance. And he is putting down this un-American organization. And they are going to Americanize America. So they have a big, major war, labor war goes on now down in the southern part of the state. And as they did in, as they did at Cripple Creek, at Telluride, or not Telluride, but at Trinidad, they simply gather them up and stick them on railroad cars and ship them out. At Telluride, they had also, there was a major involvement. In fact, this superintendent of one of the mines, while he's sitting playing cards in the evening, with his back to a window, somebody shot him through the window with a shotgun. I mean, there was an open gunfight, battle, between the strikers and the strike breakers in, at one of the mines. The strike breakers give up and they march them over the hill. You see, they're not, they don't, the mine owners aren't the only ones that ship them out. They ship them out, march them over the hill to away from there. Well, if the strike goes on and the head of the union is a man by the name of St. John. Well, he is arrested for a murder of a corpse that's supposed to be out on one of the roads out there. Well, the interesting part about it, now St. John they will send to prison. He will eventually get out, and then they'll help organize the IWW. But a year afterwards, the guy that's supposed to be killed, Jules Barnes, he appears in court for a divorce. Well, the dead men don't need divorces. I don't care how you put it. And the sheriff, who had swore that he was dead on Boomerang Road, is there to testify and make sure, because of the state laws, that the divorce is legitimate. You know, this was the whole system of it. It's unbelievable. If you want to look up, now more to some others, but if you want to look it up, now a name slips my mind. When I remember it, I'll tell you about it. But you can go on the line and, what's your name? Anyhow, the strike was over there. They fought it that hard. One of the places that they fought it, and the people in northern, that opened up the mines in Routt County, have a big investment in the mines in the northern coal field around Erie and Lafayette and Frederick and that area. The Northern Coal Company is one of them. In 1908, so the strike is broken in 1904. Oh, I thought we had one more thing, but it just makes it. During the election in 1904, see, Peabody, he definitely wanted to win the election. And Adams was running against him, and there was an enormous amount of corruption that went on, there's no doubt about it. But anyhow, Adams got the most votes. Peabody said there's some false crookedness, and he appointed 2 people to the Supreme Court. So then they wind up with who is actually going to be on the day that they have to make a decision of who will be the governor of the state of Colorado. Well, Adams, he is sworn in as governor, then he resigns. Peabody is then sworn in as governor, and he resigns. And his lieutenant governor, he becomes governor. Colorado has 3 governors in one day. Actually, in about 1 hour. Anyhow, going back to what I was saying with the coal, and now with all the fighting they had and the blood that was there, in 1908, Colorado signed, the Northern Coal signed a contract with the UMWA. All the fighting over it, and then we signed a contract. And it ran well till 1910, and then the Southern Field was wanting to put a stop to it, trying to cut down on the coal prices, and all the competition that went on in the upper levels of it. So they caused a strike in 1910 in the Northern Coal Field. Now, in 1908, they start mining coal at Oak Creek. 1 year later, they had produced 92,000 tons of coal. 1910, we have our first strike. Now, it didn't amount to too much in Oak Creek. They were able to break the strike fairly quickly there because there's only 3 mines working. And they didn't have that much, but the connection between, because the owners of most of the mines in Oak Creek and the owners of the mines in the Northern Coal Field were very much the same people throughout, and very much the same interests with them. Well, the coal strike in the Northern Coal Field continues. And it really got pretty heated in 1912. In 1912, they have strikes at some of the mines. They had actually put fences up around the mines, not to keep the strikers out, but to keep the strikebreakers in. They're prisoners inside there, literally. And the thing continued. It wound up with a bunch of them being arrested because the right owners wanted to have the detective agency, Baldwin Felts, take over the law enforcement, and then they could bring in a lot of strikebreakers. And the sheriff in Boulder County, a sheriff by the name of Cap, would not go along with it. Now, in Adams and the county, they would go along with it, in Weld County, but not. So they get a judge who has an injunction. He says under his injunction that the detectives will now regulate the law within these counties, and the sheriff's set aside. The judges are set aside. There was a protest. The judge who had sent them to prison, he condemns the protesters and sent a good meaning, sent 12 of the people who were United Mine Workers guys to prison for a long time. It was not American. This was not the way it should be conducted. But it continues now until the whole reason for this big strike and the Ludlow massacre that comes out is that Lawson, who had been shot back in at Newcastle, is now the head of the Union in Colorado, and his office is in Greeley, or in that area, northern Coalfield. He's wanting to expand the strike, because there's 25,000 coal miners in the state of Colorado at this time. This is a big, big business, you see. And so they will now have it, so they will be able to go on strike. They get an agreement from the national union, so they can go on strike, and they will start the strike for 1913-14. Now the issues, before we get into that, let me just talk about some of the issues that are involved. Child labor. Now there were child labor laws on the books in Colorado. The head of the CF&I, he writes a report and is proud of the fact that there is 114 boys working at the steel mill in Pueblo. That's not talking about in the mines. I'm talking about in the steel mill. 114 boys, 14 years to 16 years old. They're working 12 hours a day, and they're working for a half wages. Well, that teaches them the use of hard work and to be frugal. Yeah, you bet. It's a good lesson for them. Ventilation in the mines. And as they go deeper, you see there's only one way in and one way out. I have to take a look here. Let me sort through this just very quickly and see where I'm at with part of it. But there's yeah, here it is. In 1910, in this state, I can get to where I can read it now. All right. 75 men were killed at the Primo mine. This is in the southern Coalfield. 56 men at the Starkfield mine. 79 at the Deluge explosion. And 10 at the Light and Fire. The Light and Fire just out of Denver. That's owned by Sam Perry, who happens to be one of the Perry Mansfield in this mountain right here, and so on that happened. That's just 200 and some that are killed. Plus there's another 90 some that were killed by fall of rock and so on within them. So we have over 300 people in 1 year killed in Colorado. There's mine safety laws, but they're not enforced. They're not enforced at all. So one of the things that they wanted is, on the strike, was to have the safety laws enforced. Not new ones, just enforce what you have. Have roof control, so you can have ventilation. The men were paid by, instead of receiving pay, $1, the currency of the realm, they were paid in stripped. It's only good you see at the company store. Or if you paid for $5, you can pay $2.50, and then you can go out, you see. You couldn't, if you lived in the company town, you had to pay rent for the house you were required to live in. The companies assumed they were going to make at least 4 to 8% profit off of those buildings each year. They planned to run a coal mine without cost. You see, there was no, instead of having a 2,000 pound ton, because you paid by the ton, a ton of coal for the miners was at least 2,400 to 2,700 pounds, depending upon where you were at. So the mine always got a big kickback on it, no matter how you went at it. And all they wanted was simply to have better working conditions, decent wages, and a right to live where they wanted to. Now to vote, they were all herded together in the company town, taken down, handed a ballot, already filled out. You signed the stuff and they put it in. You see, in the Italians and the Southern Europeans, that is the Austrians, Germans, and all of them were considered to be too ignorant to know the difference. They were just simply puppets. And they were being treated nicely. As they were being, well, they went on strike. And it's, how much time do I have left? 25 minutes, oh, thank you. Because I have a lot of ground to cover here yet. But anyhow, they're going on strike in the southern field, and it becomes very hot very quickly. In Trinidad, about 250 women were protesting, so they down the street, legitimately down the street. Well, now the militia, I'll get back where we belong. Now the militia, they come out on and stop them, you see, and go into, and the general's in charge, and he really comes up there too. Well, one of the ladies, she don't back off from him, so he kicks her in the chest. Well, when he kicked and she fell, and her skirt flew up, his horse jumped, and he fell off. And everybody else laughed at him, so he had his troops draw their swords and charge them. And they did. And scattered and injured people, and one woman who was standing there, the militiaman came by and just jammed the rifle down on their foot and broke it, crushed it. Well, the general said, well, that's just standard way of handling riots. They could go about this without any problem. Well, in West Virginia, they had used a machine gun, you see, at a strike. So they brought the machine gun out to Colorado. Then they remodeled a truck, one of those old 1914 trucks, so you can imagine what it really was. But anyhow, and they armored it, you see, at CF&I. Well, what do you do with a machine gun on a truck if it's just there and nobody's really working? So they go out to, I don't know, the camp. Can't think of it right off. Anyhow, they just go out with their machine guns and just shot the hell out of the camp and shot up all the tents. Well, a boy 14 years old, he is running from them trying to find a safe place. Well, they shoot him, he's down. He tries to crawl, so then they just started shooting him some more. Forbes is the camp that was at. And then a girl coming home from school, they just shot her. 2 kids are just shot. Well, they had to have a little practice. You see, there was no sense of anything being wrong so far as the militia, as far as the rest of them were concerned, because it was un-American to be out there striking, and they had no business to do it. And they just shot the tent up. Now this isn't Ludlow. This isn't the massacre, you understand? Now there was others. Here now, let me just leave that set for a while and come up to Oak Creek. And the strike there now, in 1913-14, before that, now Oak Creek's a different place. It's still a different place. But anyhow, you see, Ed Bell, who was the sheriff at Cripple Creek, who ran all of the Western Federation of Minor People Law and put them in the cars and shipped them as part of his pay. Now, all these sheriffs got paid extra. He got the town of Oak Creek. Well, the town of Oak Creek is not mine controlled. It is Bell controlled. And it's a place where you're going to have gambling, because Mr. Ed Bell controlled the prostitution, the gambling, and all of the red light stuff in Cripple Creek. He and his wife. He just transported that right up to Oak Creek, and it's going right there in Oak Creek. Well, now there was attempt in 1911 to have a citizens group that gained control of the government in Oak Creek, and they did not. But in 1912, Oak Creek elected a socialist government, and they are pro-union. Now, in the southern part of the state, in the northern part of the state, in all of the other districts, and there are mining areas throughout the state, when the people who were in the mining camps, they had to move out immediately. Well, in Oak Creek, where Decker Park is today, now that's been changed quite a little bit because of the WPA project. That is where one of the mine camps was at, right in the town of Oak Creek. And the law in Oak Creek, that is the marshals and that, protected it. The main street at that time went right by it. The other main camp that they had of mine strikers was out where 16 comes off of 14 right there at the inlet to the reservoir. Yeah. And anyhow, that was Gilruth's ranch, and they spent the winter there. Old Shorty Havity, who was a boy at that time, he said, boy, the fishing was good. As they fished out there, and actually these camps, they actually had quite a little bit of social life for them. There was over 21 different nationalities, first language nationalities, available in Oak Creek at one time at this time. And this is the one place that they all got together in these camps, and they had their music times, they got together, and they got to know each other rather than being isolated and isolated and isolated. And so the community thing became together. Now there was not, in Oak Creek, was not any strikebreakers, scabs as they call them at that time, coming in until November the 10th. Now, the sheriff, let me go back just a little. Throughout all of the strikes, the sheriffs throughout them, they received quite a little bit of money. We don't know what Shivington got, if anything, here in Routt County, but it is known that the sheriff in Huerfano County received over $100,000 for this. So there was big money involved in it. All right, up to that time, now there had been some attempts to bring in some strikebreakers before that. And Marshal Decker ran them out and kept them out. And it didn't happen. I marched, they go to Denver and have a meeting. The sheriff comes back and says he will protect all strikebreakers or anybody else that wants to go to work. And they start hiring Phelps detectives to be guards within them. Well, it winds up then they have some fairly hard riot things and some shooting. Now, no one is killed, but there was some shooting and what have you. Shorty Hamady said he spent the night, he and his family, in the basement there, what is now the Circle R in Oak Creek. And then they moved out the next day to the Gilruth Ranch where they spent the year. They had a series of violence then, but it quieted down until about Christmas time. Well now, Sam Bell, Ed Bell's brother, they had a mercantile store and other businesses in Oak Creek. The white store building is just across the street from the museum. It's just on the corner and across from 131. That's the old Bell Mercantile store. But at Christmas time, a group of women had gone into Bell's Mercantile to buy some stuff so they could have Christmas with their children, now the strikers. Well, Sam refused to give them any credit. Well, it ticked off the ladies. So they snatched Bell by the collar and yanked him outside and overhauled him. And one of them did it with a 2x4. Well, a group of people are standing around cheering them on. Well, then the deputy sheriff started arresting all the people who were standing around cheering. And they brought them down here. They were strikers, brought them down to Steamboat and put him in jail. Well, now the head of the union in Oak Creek, he comes down to go their bail. Well, he's arrested. The Undersheriff Fry arrests him. No other reason, and just felt he needed to be arrested, so they arrested him. Now they have their court case and a trial with him, you see. Well, during the trial at the end of it, according to what the pilot will tell us, is right at the end of it, several businessmen came in and stood at the back of the court until the judge handed down his decision. Then they sent a spokesman forward. He goes forward and he says, I'm not here to discuss this or debate it, and he hands it down a series of ultimatums of people that have to get out of town. Most of them are guys who own bars or houses in Oak Creek, as well as strikers and strikers leaders. The mayor, who is a socialist, he has to leave, or else they're going to come down and clean the town out and give them a time to be there. Well, I need to dig one more of these out right quick because it's worth reading. But I don't see it. Anyhow, the Ed Dole, who is Secretary-Treasurer of the United Mine Workers and is at the Northern Coalfield, he sends a message up and tells them anyone who allows them to come and take their guns or to force them to leave and doesn't fight back, other than a bona fide law enforcement officer, is not worth becoming a citizen of the United States. But if you shoot one of them and kill him, we'll back you all the way. Well, those brave people in Steamboat, they had second thoughts, and they called in the militia. So you will have a company of militiamen that will come into Oak Creek, and they camp up on the hill where the high school's at now. And then, of course, they break the strike in Oak Creek as well. Now, before we leave that, after the Ludlow massacre, the federal government then brings in federal troops and they outstall the militia people. Well, in Oak Creek, they bring in a unit, a company from the 10th Cavalry. The 10th Cavalry, if you don't know, they're the Buffalo soldiers. They are African-American soldiers who had a tremendous record on the frontier. They also fought in the Philippines. I mean, this is a decorated bunch of group of people. Now, during the World War II, they are degraded to where they are just simply to be menials. But at least at Oak Creek and I'm not sure how long, but the replacements and they did build down there where, excuse me, down there where Decker Park did, they built some barracks for them. And the town of Oak Creek at least tried to purchase them. Now, I never found out whether they actually got it done or not. But it kind of gets me, because you know, it was black soldiers, Buffalo soldiers, in the 9th Cavalry that came to the rescue of the people that were pinned down during the Ute uprising at Milk Creek. So I think, there's a little thing there with them. Now, going back down to the southern field, now you'll have Mother Jones who comes in, and she's really a fairly radical lady, but an older gal that can stir up a lot of trouble. She is with the strikers, and they put her in jail. They have time in Orfano County of more fighting. Then in April of 1914, for no apparent reason, why? Why does the militia, that is mounted people, machine guns, and all of them come out and decide to wipe out the colony, the tent community, with 1,200 people in it, women and children. The day before, they'd been, the Greeks and whatever, been playing baseball out there, and it was a peaceful place. There was none. They came out and they start shooting it up, literally. People would try to escape and they would go over behind the railroad tracks or down on the draw, and they spend the whole day shooting. Well, after that's over, then the militia comes down and sets the tents on fire. Well, they had dug holes because of the before a fiasco for people to get in so they could be below ground in case they get being shot at. And then they set the tents on fire. Their families are down in these holes, and they burned them. It is the massacre of Ludlow massacre of children, of women, children, and everybody else. They didn't. The sense that goes on with them. There was a testimony that was taken out, and if you look at the government documents, you see there's volumes afterwards of what they investigated. Well, one person, you see, there's two girls come out and they're dressed in white, which is, well, we give up. And the question was, well, surely you didn't shoot at them. And the respondent says, well, you're goddamn right I did. Can you imagine? Can you imagine what was going on here? The strike was finally broken. After it was over with, the head of the CF&I wrote a letter to Rockefeller, to John D. Rockefeller Jr., and during the strike of the strike breakers that had been brought in, there had been a large number of accidents that are death from falls of rock, from equipment running over them, from a multitude of different things and ventilations failing and so on. And he asked Rockefeller, can we do something about this? What in the name of hell were they striking over? I just got 5 minutes here, so I'm going to come to an end very quickly. I will shut this up, but I want to go through it very quickly, so get to it. Afterwards, then nationally we go into World War I, and then comes the Red Scare. You see, they passed the Alien and Sedition Acts. The biggest targets that they had was the Union, especially the Western Federation of Miners. Not the Western Federation of Miners, the IWW, International Workers of the World. They'll gather up in Chicago. They brought in a large number of them, held a mock trial, and sent some of them to prison for 20 years. Eugene V. Debs, who had ran for president on a socialist ticket, he's sent to prison. As one of the attorney generals said, the nation has never been as laud as it had been during this period. But one of the organizations that is helping the federal government, the G-men as they called them at that time, is the Ku Klux Klan. Going to Americanize America, going to save America from all of those things of the past. Well, the war is over, and I'm hurrying on with this. They have then, here in Colorado, they put in the armory at Craig so they could have troops available for strikes. It might be at Mount Harris or at Oak Creek. There is, the unions are pretty well broken during the 1920s. Now, the Sacco and Vanzetti case that happens, and the trial was held for them, and whether they had murdered somebody or not in the East, but it winds up having the Sacco and Vanzetti strikes. And this is an IWW. This isn't United Mine Workers. Hell, more people walked out on strike in the southern field and here, and they had to bring troops in again to Oak Creek. They had troops in Mount Harris in 1920. This was a major strike. And they bring up out of the southern coal fields. They don't want to have another massacre like Ludlow in the southern coal field. So they bring them up to the northern coal field, to the Columbine mine. And when the people who had permission from Josephine Routt to come in and protest, picket on the property in its account, it's a public road down to the post office. But when they come in, they start shooting at them, and it is a massacre again. Now, not as big as they had at Ludlow, and drive them out, the Columbine massacre. However, this time, and then I will quit, this time they overplayed their hand. This gal that now is Josephine Routt, her father passes away, and she inherits the Rocky Mountain Fuel Company, the third largest fuel company in the state. And she borrows money, so she becomes the owner of it, the chief stockholder. Ousts all of the people who had been officers in the coal company and puts in her own people. John Larson, the man who had been shot, the man who led the strike at Ludlow, he becomes her labor manager. Vice President, she signs a contract with the UMWA. And they had a meeting over it with some of the other mine owners and what have you. And when she came in, one of the men sitting there said, well, something to the effect that, well, it's nice to have a beautiful woman here. And she said, what we need is men with guts. And she had guts. She is the first woman to be a police officer in Denver. She not only had the coal company and put Larson in there with it, she has a master's degree, she has a degree in economics. She can go anywhere, and her personal friend is Eleanor Roosevelt. She became the assistant secretary of the treasurer under Roosevelt, so she's the second woman to hold that office. In 1937, she started having health care programs which didn't pass. If you don't like Obamacare, that's the gal that planted the seed, you understand? And she changed the whole, and the labor unions were there. And I'll quit with that because she's got the knife out. So thank you much. Any questions?
If they shot all these people that worked, who came in to work in the mines after they got shot?
What's that?
Who came in to work in the mines after all these people got shot?
What they were doing, what they did to bring people in. Now, in 1903-1904 strike, most of the coal miners were people from the British Islands. Afterwards, they brought in Italians and people from Southern Europe. They had representatives there, and one of the things that will cause a lot of hardship for some of them is these representatives were telling Italians and Austrians and Greeks of all of the good things that would happen, so they had no problem bringing people in. And then down in the corner between Kansas, Missouri, and Arkansas, where the lead mines were at, and there was a very strong Protestant group there. They could always bring scabs out of that area.
So they weren't afraid to get shot after all these people got shot?
Yes, they were. Yes, they were. They were afraid of being shot, and literally, when they would get to the mine, because they had been promised a lot of things, you understand? They were literally fenced in, and there were patrols and guards around them. And during the strike, there were a very large number of them were killed underground, and they would want to come out to join the Union. They could not. Or just go home. They could not. They were prisoners inside. You know, you think things are tough now. You haven't found out what it was like with democracy then. Any other questions right quick?
I got one.
All right.
So, is your Ph.D. is it in history
Yes.
from Colorado?
No. My PhD is from history from Oklahoma State University. But for various reasons, I've done a lot of history and study of history in Colorado, and I was raised in Pittsburgh. So I got somebody pointing over here for somebody. Oh, clear against the wall. Yell at me. Well, you're not like my wife. She just say, hey. All right.
I'm just super impressed that you walked away from the podium and you knew all this and you gave this really incredible lecture, but you only once looked at your notes.
Well, I don't have any notes of what I was going. Those are just quotes up there. I made it all up. No, thank you very much. Thank you. And see you all next year.